The Philadelphia Eagles had arguably the worst run defense in the NFL to start the year. But why have they been so bad, and most importantly, can they fix their issues? To figure out what's going on, the most obvious place to start with is this play from the Saints and Cowboys game. I need to set the scene, so stick with me here for a minute. The Cowboys align to the Saints formation in an over front. What this means is a 3 technique, which is a defensive tackle that is aligned on the outside shoulder of the guard and the B gap is set to the run strength. Because the Saints offense has 3 blockers to the left of the center and 2 to the right, the defense is called the run strength to the left. The over front is probably the most popular front in the NFL, and it's referred to as an even front. It's not an even front because there are 4 down linemen, it's an even front because there is an open B gap. Conversely, an odd front has both B gaps covered pre-snap. It's important to understand the difference between even fronts and odd fronts because offenses attack each front different ways. We'll get back to this later. Even fronts are often vulnerable to runs that attack the B gap, like we see here from the Saints. In the Cowboys over front, they elect to align their nose tackle on the outside shoulder of the center and leave the guard uncovered. This lets the guard climb up to the linebacker full speed. Micah Parsons gets way too far upfield, and the defense predictably can't cut the run off. So what's the solution? Well, there's many, but let's look at this play from Fangio's Dolphins in 2023. The Dolphins also come out in an over front with a 3 technique to the run strength, but instead of shading their nose tackle on the shoulder of the center, they bump him out to head up on the guard in a 2 technique. Other times, they'll leave him on the inside shoulder of the guard in a 2-eye technique, but either way, this is referred to as a G technique. So technically, this is an over G front. By bumping the nose tackle out just a couple feet, notice how he is now able to attack the guard and keep his linebacker free. Between tying up the guard and getting pushed by the center into the B gap, he's essentially eliminated 2 gaps while keeping the linebacker free. The linebacker can now execute a fit and fold technique where he maintains presence in his gap and then falls back to the open space created by the G technique defensive tackle occupying the combo block. The G technique in Fangio's over front is incredibly important. Look at this play from his 2018 season with the Bears and notice how long the 2-eye is able to stay square and tie up the center and guard. This allows the linebacker to stay clean and fall back into the play when the runner gets cut off. This relationship between the 2-eye and the linebacker behind him is vital to the success of the run defense. A good combination can lead to a lot of negative plays for an offense. Here's a play from the Eagles game against the Falcons. What you can't have happen is for your G-Tech to allow quick access to the linebacker and then also get sealed out of his gap. Here we see Ojomo laid out of his stance, which then forces Nakobe Dean to step up into the B gap in order to cut the runoff. He can't fill and fold like we saw earlier, which is exacerbated by the fact that Bond gets chopped down and Jalen Carter gets cut off on the backside. We'll get back to the mess going on over there in a minute. On this play, we see Milton Williams laid out of his stance and with his hands, consequently gets his shoulders turned and then gets washed out of his gap too easily, but to be honest, it's not the end of the world. It actually happens quite often for G technique defensive tackles against outside zone runs. Look at how the sequence plays out from the Bears in 2018. The G tech gets washed down the line, but the linebacker folds back inside off of the defensive tackle and he is unblocked. At the end of the day, if the G tech is taking on 2 defenders, then that's a win for the defense. The linebacker might have a certain gap pre-snap, but if a defensive tackle is getting pushed into his gap, he needs to refit and make it right. The best linebackers recognize when they need to plug their gap and when they can fall back unblocked. I think Nakobe probably could have done a better job falling back into the play. Although this next play isn't outside zone, the same principle applies. His over-aggressiveness gets him caught up in the wash too much at times. I think it's something he'll get more comfortable with as the year goes on. Overall execution between the 2-eye defensive tackles and the linebacker behind him needs to get better. Now, moving on to the play from the 3 technique and linebacker on the backside of these plays. The 3 technique's role and relationship with the linebacker stacked behind him is extremely important as well. Against this front and alignment, when offenses run outside zone weak, they have 2 choices to make when faced with the backside 3 tech. They can either try to release the guard up to the linebacker right away and hope the backside tackle can cut off the 3 tech, or they can slow play the guard's release and have him play heavy through the 3 tech to give the offensive tackle time to overtake the defender. Conversely, the defense has 2 main ways to handle this situation when using their base play call, or in other words, play calls that don't have some type of line movement or blitz attached. they can have the 3 technique play heavy through the guard and give the linebacker an opportunity for a run through. The added benefit of moving the nose tackle to a 2-eye is that it helps make the read clearer for the linebacker, as the center has to really get moving to help block. The other option is to let the guard release up to the linebacker right away, but in those instances, the 3 tech must effectively close off the space that the guard creates when he releases up to the second level and force the ball to cut back. The Eagles, and in particular Jalen Carter, struggled with not getting cut off on the backside against the Falcons. The Eagles really slid Carter's alignment from outside shoulder of the guard to pretty much head up on the guard, probably because of how much the Falcons run zone weak. Unfortunately, he still lets the guard have virtually a free release to the linebacker, and to top it off, he still gets reached and cut off by the backside tackle. This issue is compounded by Milton getting washed, Dean not falling back, and Bond getting cut. We see almost the exact same scenario later in the quarter. Carter's hands get very wide in both the run game and in pass rush, and here we see the guard have easy access to his chest, which turns his shoulders and gives the tackle time to reach him. This time Carter plays thick through the guard, but we see the same wide hands, he gets turned, and then he throws the guard into Bond. By throwing the guard by, his momentum essentially stops for long enough for the backside tackle to seal him. Bond, for his part, needs to pull the trigger when the C's part like this, although at this point in the game, he had been cut a million times, so I can understand his hesitancy. Having said that, Bond must do a better job against cut blocks. In previous videos, I had mentioned how Bond does a really good job shooting gaps and using a dip and rip technique to slip past blockers. In addition to that, he also uses good near foot, near shoulder technique when he has to engage with blockers. But by doing that, he exposes that leg to getting cut. The Falcons took advantage of that and decided to use All-Pro Chris Lindstrom to climb and cut on Bond over and over and over again. He tried to adjust, but as Fangio said,
"Yeah, it was the first time he was exposed to cut blocking, and he learned a valuable lesson, and I think he's going to be better prepared for it now. He needs to react better to it, but we need to get him ready for it too."
I'm sure we'll see him tested again. We started to see Bond adjust as the game went on. In order to defeat a cut block, it's important to pull that trail leg back and out of the way. So instead of seeing Bond approach the block in this position with his trail leg turned toward the blocker, we later see him shoot his hips back and pull his trail leg away. The problem is, he doesn't do a good job with his hands to stop the guard's momentum. Notice how his hands are swiping towards himself, almost like he's trying to pull the guard by. He needs to put his hands on the back of the guard's helmet and violently shove him down into the ground. This will divert the guard's horizontal momentum downwards and help prevent Bond from getting his foot clipped. I will say this, Lindstrom is one of the best zone blocking guards in the NFL, and he chops down other all-pro linebackers with ease. He got the best of both Carter and Bond. Let's see if they come back better football players. One way defenses can try to stop teams that love running zone weak plays is to place a defender in the weak B gap pre-snap. This puts the defender in better leverage to cut off the run and force it back inside. Fangio started doing this by switching to underfronts, which is still an even front, but now the 3 technique is on the weak side of the run strength. A better way to do this is to catch the offense by surprise and shift to an underfront post-snap. Fangio often does this by slanting his line and sending pressure away from the run strength, whether that's a corner or a linebacker. The post-snap movements puts the defenders in the same spot they would have started at pre-snap. Fangio called an underfront, but with post-snap movement, he doesn't tip off his plan. Notice how the overfront pre-snap presents the open B gap, but post-snap the blitz takes it away. It often does a good job of forcing the run to cut backside or spill frontside to an unblocked defender. But pay attention to the nose tackle. More often than not, he slants into the opposite A gap. It often occupies the center and presents an A gap run through for the linebacker. We see this happen against the Falcons when they send Darius Slay on a weak corner blitz. The run gets cut off. The slant to the opposite A gap from Jalen Carter presents a huge run through opportunity for Bond, but he never triggers downhill and the guard knocks him out of the play. The run does cut back, but the motion causes confusion. The motion bumps Maddox into the box as a C-gap defender, and due to the blitz and resulting slant of the defensive line, he's now responsible for the B-gap. But he hardly moves, the wide receiver seals him with an insert block, and what should have been a play for no gain turned into a play that should have gone for 4 yards, that finally turned into a gain of 14. The next quarter, the Eagles decided to just line up in an overfront, probably to keep things simple enough to line up and play. The Falcons opt to run outside zone to the strong side as a result. When Fangio plays outside zone heavy running teams, he'll often have the strong side edge defender spike inside and play the C-gap inside of the tight end. This does a couple things. First, against zone heavy teams, oftentimes they use play action bootleg passing concepts as a result. Pay attention to this play from the Panthers and Packers game last year. The Panthers are in their odd front and their nickel package, playing cover 3 3. Against this formation, the safety, who is responsible for the flat and coverage and also the C gap in the run game, has to chase the tackle as he works away on the outside zone play fake. But the tight end is releasing to the flat the opposite way. That's a huge run-pass conflict. To help alleviate this issue, Fangio will often opt to have his edge defender spike into the C gap, and with the safety now responsible for the D gap, he doesn't have nearly as big of a run-pass conflict. In addition to that, on run plays that are away, it allows your fast edge rushers to pursue and get blindside hits and punch-out attempts. Though undersized, Nolan Smith and Bryce Huff can be assets to the run defense on the backside in pursuit, but this requires that you cut the runoff on the front side and force it back first. When the Eagles play with this technique and face runs to the strong side, the edge defender is no longer responsible for contain. That's the flat defender, who is a safety in this case. When he gets sealed on a crack block, that then becomes a corner's responsibility on the crack replace. Whether or not Huff plays the block on the inside half of the tight end or plays through the tackle and then ricochets back out is a matter of preference. Having him play through the tight end helps keep the tight end from releasing up to the second level, but that makes it more likely the tackle will block the linebacker. Ultimately, Huff probably could have played the block a little bit better, but he collisioned and slowed down the tight end's release, kept Bond clean, and also came free late to pursue the run. But somebody has to force the run to cut back inside to the pursuit. CJ, for his part, has to be more physical against the crack block. He has to use his hands to control and fight through the block. Later in the drive, the Eagles come out in their under front again, but this time they align Huff in the C gap pre-snap. He appears to lose his leverage initially, but what's also interesting to note is that he plays the block by peeking inside in the B gap, indicating that's his gap, and Bond slides out to the C gap. This could be another opportunity to give Bond a run-through chance for a stop. If that is Huff's gap, then that's a really good job to lock out and create separation to shed. Regardless, this time CJ is again the contained defender and makes sure to go outside and force the run back in. Slay is the unblocked defender, but is again late, and then still lets the runner get back to the outside. They have to work out how they're going to play the crack block, so Slay can quickly and confidently fill downhill. Either CJ has to work through the inside of the block and spill the ball outside to Slay, or he needs to work over the block and force a run back inside to the pursuit, and Slay then knows to fill inside. You can't flip-flop play to play. If this is how they're going to play spill techniques though, then they're going to have to set the edge and force runs back inside. But can the Eagles' run defense be fixed? You guys came here to find answers, right? What can the Eagles do? Well, a lot of people have been saying more odd fronts, and that may be the answer, and here's why. In odd fronts, the outside zone plays are now heavily leveraged by an edge defender outside of the tackle and defensive tackle outside of the guard. The center and both guards also have defensive tackles lined in front of them, so all those cut blocks Bond faced won't happen. This will help the personnel better because Milton Williams and Moro Ojomo are strong and quick but undersized defensive tackles. Therefore, they tend to struggle facing double teams and combination blocks in both gap scheme and zone run schemes. By using odd fronts, they face much less double teams, and then they can use their quickness, leverage, and strength to win. It would also allow Zach Bond or Nakobe Dean to play through less blocks, which is better for both of their skill sets. There are downsides though in both the run and pass game, and if you want evidence of that, study the Cardinals game from last year to see how they were stressed in both the run and pass game. Also, the Eagles gave up 2 30-plus yard plays in their odd front against the Packers for various different reasons. There is still issues at hand. But either way, a lot of these same principles we've talked about can be applied to odd front looks as well. But what about troubleshooting some of their issues in their over front instead of tossing it in week 3? If they're going to have problems with Milton and Ojomo getting washed out of the play as a 2-eye technique, why not use it to their advantage? If they're most likely going to get washed out of their gap anyways, have them run read stunts. When the edge defender reads the offensive tackle block out on him, he'll slant inside and replace the 2-eye that's getting washed outside anyway. You can get easy tackles for loss this way, plus an unblocked linebacker after the read stunt screws with the offensive line's blocking assignments. When this happens, it turns into a natural stunt with the ball getting cut off front side anyway. Why not just call a stunt where the defensive tackle knows he's going to be the contained defender? Interestingly enough, if you're watching this before they play the Saints, you'll probably see them utilize more base personnel and odd fronts due to the amount of 21 personnel the Saints have used so far this season. If you're watching this after, I'll probably have some content somewhere discussing the results of the tactics. Regardless, once they get back to 11 personnel, they're likely going to be back in their even fronts. But the most important thing to all of this, either way, is that what these guys need is time and repetition to get down the system and build on the chemistry and communication. I talked about how Slay and CJ need to get on the same page versus crack blocks. If Nakobe sees Milton is lined up as a 2-eye and he continues to get washed out of his gap, he can probably have a mindset that he's more likely to get washed out of the play and be prepared to exchange gaps more quickly. Breaking down the assignments and the tactics that Fangio has at his disposal doesn't matter if the players aren't confident in their assignments and operating as one unit. Good defenses must be fast and physical, and if they're not able to play confidently, then they're not going to be able to play well. Only time will tell if the Eagles are able to make the adjustments necessary to improve their run defense.